Live from Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come gather around the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Christos anesti, alitos anesti. Happy Easter to my Orthodox Christian listeners, family, and friends. Hope you had a meaningful Holy Week. And for you non-Orthodox Christians, if you were coming home from somewhere late Saturday nights into Sunday morning, and you were in your car, and you looked over and saw in the car next to you a candle, an actual lit candle in the car, that's what that was all about. It's all part of Orthodox Easter. Those were Orthodox Christians coming home late from the resurrection liturgy, and that candle was lit from a flame that came all the way from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Please note, there is no live YouTube stream tonight. It will resume next week. Second hour of this transmission, Rosemary Ellen Guiley on saints, incorrupt bodies, and miracles. My first hour guest stumbled onto a fascinating subculture in North America inspired by comic book heroes. This subculture is known by the initials RLSH, real-life superheroes, ordinary men and women who create superhero identities for themselves, design superhero costumes, and then head out into the mean streets of major cities all over North America to fight crime and help the less fortunate. Tea Krulos is the author of Heroes in the Night, inside the real-life superhero movement. Tea Krulos, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So this is a fascinating subculture. Let me again repeat the name of the book, Heroes in the Night, Inside the Real-Life Superhero Movement. This was your first work of nonfiction. You've written other books, but I wanted to dial back to this one because I'm not real familiar with this subculture. I've seen it in the movies, but I didn't actually realize that there were people running around with their own costumes and their own names and fighting crime. How did you discover this subculture?
Yeah, it was a really fun day when I discovered this. So it started, I was riding the bus, reading the local weekly newspaper, and there's a column called News of the Weird that's syndicated. And there was just a very short blurb that said, hey, there's this subculture of people that call themselves real-life superheroes, and they actually adopt their own personas and hit the streets looking for crime. And I was like, that's really strange. And, you know, I'm a lifelong comic book fan, so I thought it was interesting, and it just kept bugging me. I was walking around doing errands, and I was like, wait, what does that mean? Like, who are these people, and what do they do? So I'm a freelance writer here in Milwaukee, and I was like, I wonder if there's a local guy here in Milwaukee, or a team or whatever, because I would love to meet them and write a magazine article about it.
Yeah, like the River West Ranger or something.
Right, yes, exactly. So when I got home, I hopped on the internet and did some searching, and sure enough, I found this guy who calls himself the Watchman, and he had his own. It was a MySpace page, actually. This was a while ago, and so I sent him a message, and I was like, "I'm a journalist. I'm not looking to make fun of you. I'm genuinely curious about this. You want to tell me your story?" And he said, sure, why don't you meet me in a city park, you know, later this week at night. So I go to this park, and I'm kind of pacing around. It's cold outside, and all of a sudden, there he is, walking towards me, wearing a full-on costume. You know, he had a mask and gloves and a shirt with his logo on it. And I can't describe that moment because it's like, wow, this is for real, actually.
Like someone walked out of a DC comic book,
yeah,
and there he is in front of you.
Yeah, and so we walked around, and I found him really interesting and a really earnest guy. A lot of what he was saying made sense to me, you know. And he definitely didn't seem like he was psychotic or anything like that.
Was he a big guy?
Yeah, I would say he's similar in height to me, so he's about 6'4" or so.
That's a big guy.
Yeah.
Did he look to be in pretty good shape?
Yeah, he's in decent shape. He used to be in the Army. It was really great that I made this good connection to him because he kind of put in a good word for me among the real-life superhero community, I guess you would call it.
Oh, so they keep in contact sort of, I guess, online?
Yeah, they used to do most of that on forums. They have their own forums, and that kind of gradually shifted into, like Facebook and other social media.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm very fascinated about this whole thing, actually. And, I hadn't written a book. I didn't have a publisher, but I really believed it was a good story. So I would, every few months finance a trip to New York or Vancouver and Seattle and would meet up with these guys and join them on patrol, help them with charity events. I went to a real-life superhero conference in New Bedford, Massachusetts. That was really interesting. And really kind of became embedded in the subculture.
Let me just remind listeners, Tea Krulos is here, and the book is called Heroes in the Night. Now, I want to get back to the Watchmen before we sort of go to other locations and discuss other real-life superheroes, or RLSH is the acronym. Mm-hmm. So describe his costume in a little more detail. You mentioned he's got this W emblazoned on his shirt, and he was wearing a mask. What kind of a mask?
It's red. It's made out of rubber. It's kind of like Batman's mask, but without the pointy ears on it.
So like a cowl.
Yeah, a cowl, exactly. And he has red leather gloves. Usually wears, depending, this is Wisconsin, so the weather fluctuates quite a bit. So in colder months, he would have a sweatshirt with his logo on it and a trench coat and boots. And then in the summer, he has kind of a lighter weight, more colorful costume.
Right. And what does he do? He just patrols various neighborhoods in Milwaukee. I've been to Milwaukee, and great town, great museum, and of course the Brewers, great stadium and so forth. But there are some, like most big cities, there are a few dodgy ends of town. So what does he do?
Well, and I found it very interesting because the neighborhood I live in, I love the neighborhood. It's got a lot of creative people in it, artists and musicians. But, it does have crime problems.
Is that River West?
River West.
Yeah, I know it. Great coffee shops.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots and lots of stuff I love about the neighborhood, but definitely I've heard many horror stories about my friends getting mugged or robbed. So I was like, I'm maybe thinking outside the box here could work, So I actually did do many foot patrols with him, and he eventually developed a team. And we would walk around all night in River West, trying to see if there was situations that we could intervene in or help people out. So he does patrols, but most real-life superheroes do kind of a mix of like I describe it as like a costume neighborhood watch patrol.
Right.
And they also like to draw attention to themselves to do charity events. So, for example, for a while, the Watchmen and his group were doing a Christmas toy drive. They donated the toys to charity, and they do other events like that as well.
And when did he make the decision? How did he make the decision that he was going to make himself a costume, assume this alias, and go out and patrol the streets of Milwaukee, Wisconsin at night? How did that happen for him?
He's a big comic book fan, too, of course. Most real-life superheroes are. Not all of them, but most of them are big into comic books. He's kind of rare, though, in that he had this idea before it was really a social movement online. He just was inspired by the comic books, and he was like, this is something, I want to do. Maybe it will inspire other people. And eventually he found the online presence and started connecting with other people.
And has he been involved in some sort of a takedown? Has he apprehended a criminal? Has he prevented a crime from taking place? Has he saved anyone's life?
I think, he has a couple of stories where he has scared people away from a bad situation. So, he tells me a story of he heard about an underage party, and he saw some guys that looked like they were going to take advantage of a woman who was inebriated, and he kind of scared them off, Well,
it sounds like he's an imposing figure. He could do that.
Yeah, I would. If I saw him walking down a dark alley, I would be scared.
Tea Krulos is with us, writer and author of Heroes in the Night, Inside the Real-Life Superhero Movement. He's also the author of Monster Hunters. We'll have to have you back to do another show on that. But, again, this subculture is absolutely fascinating. Now, is he, the Watchman we're talking about in Wisconsin, is he known to locals? Have they taken a shine to them? Has he sort of taken on sort of folk hero status? Is he known to the police?
Yes, I would say to all that. Especially in River West, it was fun. I remember one night we were on patrol, and we walked by a house party, and someone spotted him, and he went in the party, and he was like, "It's the Watchman!" And everyone in this party came out in the yard, and they all wanted to have their pictures taken with him, and it was really fun. And he's had encounters with the police. I remember one of the first patrols I went on, I was with him and another real-life superhero from Milwaukee named Blackbird. And the police were kind of circling around us, and then they stopped. And they're like, "Okay, so are you guys going to a costume party?" And he was like, "No, we're actually just out here doing a safety patrol." They got alarmed about that for a minute,
right,
and asked to see their IDs, had them take off their masks so they could run their IDs. But, as they gradually were able to explain themselves a little bit more, the police were like, "Well, okay, it's not illegal, and we're not the fashion police. So, I mean, just be safe," and, so their response, I think, has been somewhat positive. I've heard other stories and seen at least one other encounter where police are not happy with this subculture, and they're basically like, this is our job to do what you're doing, and we don't want amateur participants.
Well, I can understand. Obviously, they don't want someone getting hurt. I mean, it requires proper training, but the Watchman had a career in the military, right? I'm assuming he was trained in self-defense, hand-to-hand combat, and all that stuff that superheroes need to know.
Yeah.
Does he have any sort of accoutrement, like, of course, Batman had the utility belt and the Batmobile? What does the Watchman have? Any of that stuff?
His car is not as impressive as a Batmobile, that's for sure. I love this, though. He would sometimes bring his dog on patrol with him and called him the Watchdog.
Of course.
That was kind of a cool comic book thing, like Batman had Ace the Bat Hound would appear in some of the older comics.
Right. And so his wingman, pardon the pun, Blackbird,
mm-hmm.
Did they always work as a team, or did they have their own sort of jurisdictions, if I can use that term?
No, they formed a team called the Challengers. The Challengers have not been active for a while now, but for a while they slowly grew in numbers until they had about 6 or 7 guys and one girl on the team.
So sort of River West, Wisconsin's version of the Justice League, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
All right, T, you hold on. We're going to step away for just a moment, come back, and continue to discuss this absolutely fascinating subculture, real-life superheroes. And the book is Heroes in the Night, Inside the Real-Life Superhero Movement. Tea Krulos, right here on The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. Stay with us.
The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
We are back with Tea Krulos, Heroes in the Night, Inside the Real-Life Superhero Movement. And we were talking about the Watchman in Wisconsin. So I wanted, before we move on to other areas, I wanted to talk about sort of the the antecedents to the real life superhero movement, because this sort of thing has happened before. And you point out, I think this was a brilliant example, and that was TV's The Lone Ranger, Clayton Moore.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about him.
Right. Well, Clayton Moore, later in his life, he kind of did appearances as the Lone Ranger and did charity events and stuff like that, and kind of acted like a real-life superhero in a way. And the really interesting thing I found was what I call the early prototypes. So before the internet, you did see examples of real-life superheroes here and there, randomly. And they weren't connected, and they probably didn't know about each other, but randomly would appear. So there was a costumed character in Mexico City named Super Barrio, and he dressed like a luchador, and he would organize protests and marches, rallying behind causes like immigration and housing rights and workers' rights.
Now, luchador, they're the masked wrestlers.
The masked Mexican wrestlers.
Right. People may remember that movie with Jack Black.
Right.
Which was fabulous.
Yeah. So he was an example, and slowly I just found more and more were popping up. There's a woman in New York City named Terrifica, and she had apparently had bad experiences with men, so she kind of patrolled the bars looking for inebriated women to, you know, call a taxi for them, walk them home, whatever. And
did she have a costume?
Yeah, a very colorful pink costume with like a blonde wig and a mask and a cape. And
what was sort of her era, or is she still out there?
Late 90s.
Late 90s.
The internet was around, but there really wasn't an internet culture behind this at that point. And then, you know, some of the other early examples, I kind of counted this guy. There was a guy who called himself the Fox, and he was an environmental activist. And he would do actions like, there was a soap company dumping sludge into a river near his house. And this was before there was really any sort of environmental laws. So he actually backed the pipe up so the sludge would go back into the factory. And he would leave a note that said, you know, don't mess with Mother Nature, sign the Fox.
There you go.
And he didn't really have a costume, but he had kind of a spy costume, I would describe it as.
So more like a Green Hornet.
Yeah, well, more
minus the mask.
I would say kind of like that, or a Russian spy. You know, so one action he did was he wore a trench coat and he wore a big fur hat and sunglasses and a scarf, and he walked into the corporate offices of this corporation polluting the rivers and threw some of the sludge onto the floor of the reception room, and handed the receptionist a note that said, "This is what you're doing to the river." But he was also a gentleman. I love this story because he saw that he had scared the receptionist, and he felt bad about that. So he sent her a dozen roses with a note that said, "Hey, I didn't mean to scare you. I was just trying to make a statement."
There you go. Well, he learned, from Adam West and all those cats, you got to be a gentleman if you're going to be a superhero. It's interesting, the calling card, because I just mentioned the Green Hornet. He had that, of course. He had his calling card. What about, did any of the other superheroes that you studied and write about, did they have some sort of a calling card, aside from their costume, something that made them sort of special and stand out?
Yeah, a lot of them had like a business card that they would hand out. So one of the guys I met called himself Thanatos, and he is from Vancouver. And he's a street legend there among homeless people because he assembles these care packs that have like water and socks and food and supplies and hands them out. So I joined him for one of these handouts really early in the morning, like 5 a.m. And I was like, I'm a little skeptical about this because this guy is wearing like a green skull mask and he's waking up homeless people at 5 a.m.
Yikes.
I was like, that might not be good. But to my surprise, everyone knew who he was. They're like, oh, it's Thanatos, and people were giving him hugs, and just everyone who was homeless in Vancouver knew who this guy was and what he was about.
Right, down on Hastings.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
That's a rough area.
Yeah.
And what does that name mean? Is it Thanatos?
Yes, that is the god of death. And there's an interesting story behind that name. Before he was a real-life superhero, he was doing something similar. He just wasn't wearing a costume. And one day he's doing this, and he runs into a cop, and the cop's like, "You're wasting your time, man. All these people are going to die." And so he kind of adopted this persona as like a parody of death, or, you know, if these people have nothing to look forward to but death, then I'm going to be a friendly version of that.
Interesting. Right, because we should point out, those not familiar with Hastings in Vancouver, it's East Vancouver, I think, right? These are, they're not just homeless, these are heroin addicts and crack cocaine addicts and people with some serious mental illnesses and drug addiction problems. So,
yeah, and I think he's a vet himself. He's one of the older real-life superheroes I met. When I met him, he was in his 60s. And so he's a Vietnam vet, and, you know, it made him very upset to see some of his fellow vets are now homeless on the street.
Sure. How closely do they guard their real identity?
It varies from not guarding it at all to being somewhat paranoid about it. So some were very open with me, and I went to their houses and, you know, met their wives or husbands. And some of them were like, okay, I'm going to talk to you, but you can't say, you know, even what side of town I live on or, you know, what type of car I drive. So, you know, and I respected that. I was like, yeah, anything you want me to keep confidential, I will.
So, you know, by night, a caped crusader, but by day, what are some of the jobs? What are some of the day jobs these people have?
It ranged and this was very fascinating to me too. It ranged quite a bit, from dishwashers at Waffle House to guys who have kind of a good job in Fortune 500 companies. You know, there's one I met that worked in the newspaper industry. And in addition to the economic diversity, it's just, you know, there's liberal, conservative, a lot of white guys, but not exclusively. The age range was quite a bit. So I was like, well, this is kind of an inspiring part of the story, too, is that even though they have radical differences, a lot of times they'll put those aside to work on a project together. So, and especially with, you know, the political climate over the last few years, it's kind of rare that you see that, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. The chasm between the left and right has never been wider. It's interesting because now that you mention that, I remember in Washington, D.C., there was a very rare moment where there were left-leaning groups marching and right, I guess they called them the alt-right. They were marching, and there were some clashes. By and large, they were well-behaved. And then all of a sudden, someone was missing their dog. Uh-huh. And this video went viral, and all of a sudden people came together to look for this lost dog. And I think it was, someone from the right found the dog and brought them over, and it was a protester, and they hugged. It was remarkable to see. Tea Krulos is with us, and we're talking about his wonderful, amazing book, a look inside the real-life superhero subculture. It's called Heroes in the Night. I don't know how well you were able to sort of delve into their psyche, but is there sort of a common denominator, or were there instances where these individuals had themselves suffered some kind of a trauma? I'm thinking, of course, of Batman and his inspiration. Of course, in the comic book, he witnesses his parents being murdered during a robbery outside a movie theater. Did you run across anything, maybe not that dramatic, but anything like that sort of set their trajectory for these people?
Yeah, nothing that dramatic, but certainly personal experiences are an influence on some. So some have been victims of crime or know people who have been victims of crime. Some of them have children and they just are inspired to try to make the world a better place because they want the world to be a better place for their children. A really interesting thing is at least a couple of them come from a background where they were the criminal.
Oh,
and
interesting.
They kind of are doing this as like a penance, I think.
Fascinating.
You know, they think that they've done bad things in their past and they're trying to give back. Another superhero I knew was a recovering alcoholic, and this is kind of how he stays sober. Instead of going out and drinking, he walks around the city for hours and hours at night.
Is there a superhero, real-life superhero, that stands out in your mind as one that really sort of gets in there and mucks it up with the bad guys and, you know, maybe even actually risks his life on a regular basis?
Well, yeah, I had a very frightening night when I visited Seattle. I met a real-life superhero there named Phoenix Jones. Became a pretty famous real-life superhero. And he is a guy filled with action, that's for sure. But, so, and before I tell you the story, I want to say that Phoenix Jones has done a lot of good things in Seattle. He's done a lot of great charity events. He's helped people out. He's inspired people. But I think he's made some mistakes, too. So I went out to Seattle and we're patrolling. It was about 3 a.m. And we see a group of people fighting each other. Like there's two guys. One guy's on the ground. The other guy's punching and kicking him. So Phoenix Jones runs into the middle of this and pepper sprays the guys fighting. And they get very angry. And we find out they're Russians.
Uh-oh.
Because they start screaming in Russian. And it just turned into this scene of chaos. Pepper spraying is not an exact science, so other people in this group got pepper sprayed, and they were very angry. There was a woman who took off her high-heel shoe and was beating Phoenix Jones on the head with it over and over again.
Oh, my Lord.
They kind of grouped together and then all ran at us and attacked all of us.
Oh, my Lord.
I got punched in the face, and I said, no, don't punch me. And then Phoenix Jones pepper sprayed them all again.
Oh, my gosh.
And so, at one point it looked like they might be going for a gun or something. And so, you know, I kind of, I was like, what do I do? And I saw in the street there was like this little concrete island that divides traffic.
T, forgive me, but we're going to do a little cliffhanger. You can't have a superhero show without a cliffhanger. We're going to take a quick time out. You're going to tell us how this ended. Happily, I hope. Back with more of my conversation with Tea Krulos as we continue to delve into this fascinating subculture of real-life superheroes. Back with more in a moment.
Keeping a watchful eye on the New World Order. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
We're back with Tea Krulos. Pardon the interruption, T. Had to take care of some business, but we were just in the middle of it was a cliffhanger. So you went out with Phoenix Jones in Seattle, this real-life superhero, and he tried to intervene in a kind of a melee between two Russians and pepper sprayed them. And some others that were sort of gathered around got pepper sprayed. They turned into a mob, and they set upon you, punched you, and attacked you. A woman took off her high-heel shoe and started beating Phoenix Jones over the head with it. This is not sounding good. And at one point, you said you were afraid that someone was going for a gun. So what happened?
So I saw that, and I'm like, I need to remove myself from immediate danger. So I saw this concrete island in the street, and so this was my thinking. I'm like, I'm going to cross the lane of traffic, stand on this little concrete island. If these guys try to attack me, I can push them into traffic, and then I can run up the street, you know?
All right.
So I'm standing there, and Phoenix Jones runs over, and he stands next to me, and he's like, "I'm sorry about this. Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got punched, but, I'm fine." And then we hear this loud revving sound. And we look over, and two of the guys have gotten into a big SUV.
Oh, no.
And they start peeling out and driving towards us. I'm like, they're going to try to hit us with this car. So Phoenix Jones ran one way, and I ran the other way and hid behind this concrete pillar. We were kind of by a parking garage type thing. And the SUV stops, and the guys get out and start throwing rocks at Phoenix Jones. And I was like, they're going to crush their brains in with these rocks, and then they're going to come looking for me. So then I hear this beautiful sound, which is police sirens.
Yes, the cavalry.
And and I described this in a chapter. One of my favorite quotes was, there's a video guy with us that night too, and he called 911. And this is how he described the scene, which is also the chapter of the title about this. People fighting and superheroes and pepper spray and I don't know. So the police
that could have quickly turned south, and you might not be with us.
Right. Yeah, it was one of the most frightening nights of my life, for sure.
Oh, bad. We just passed March 13th, the anniversary of a pretty gruesome murder in New York City. It was the slaying of this young woman, Kitty Genovese.
Yeah.
And these real-life superheroes, they take that day and they commemorate it. It's become sort of the official holiday of this subculture.
Yeah.
Tell me about that and why.
Right. So the case happened in New York in the 60s, if I'm remembering that, or maybe the early 70s. But Kitty Genovese came home. She was working at a bar. She came home. This man began to assault her, and he later told police that he'd gone out just because he wanted to kill a woman. And she's crying for help, and as the story goes at the time, her neighbors, and a newspaper later made, it was sort of an inflated count, of 39 neighbors who had witnessed this and did nothing to help her.
Yes.
So it was kind of the case study of people's apathy towards other people. So real-life superheroes, some of them on that date will do a special, it's like a memorial type of holiday, and they'll patrol kind of in her memory. Some of them hand out literature that explains the case. And, they kind of say this is the reason, one of the motivations behind the subculture is that we don't want things like this to happen. If you see someone in danger, you should help them out and not just pull the blinds on your window and ignore it.
You're right. Psychologists, sociologists use the Kitty Genovese case as a case study. And we're heading into another break here. This was a short segment, but I want to start this conversation now and then continue after the break. I'll just throw the question out now, and we will talk about it. We're about a minute away here. And that is, speaking of sociologists and psychologists, I wonder what they make of this phenomenon, and whether you had a chance to speak to them, whether they think this is a good idea, a bad idea, whether psychologists, for example, maybe, you know how they do, they try to crawl into people's brains and use their Freudian analysis and try to figure out what makes these people tick. We'll do that when we come back. Tea Krulos is with us, and we're talking about real-life superheroes, heroes in the night. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
The owners of the system are asleep. Now we can play. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
We are back with Tea Krulos. Tell me about the blog, first of all, before we get on to other matters.
Yeah, so a very useful tool for me in writing this book was, I was like, well, if I'm going to claim to have some expertise about this, then I should try to chronicle this. And so I had a heroesinthenight.blogspot.com where I just shared information about people that I'd met, patrols I'd went on. I featured for a while a real-life superhero of the week type thing, where I just had their picture and some basic details. I did some polls with real-life superheroes and posted the results. And it was great because the blog got picked up a lot in media pieces, and it kind of laid the groundwork for the book.
There are some great photos on the blog, and again, it's heroesinthe.night.blogspot. Is that .ca?
No, .com.
.com. Anyway, there's a great photo of, my favorite superhero growing up was Batman. Not the Bob Kane, not the comic book necessarily. I was more the Adam West, Burt Ward. I had the great villains, and of course it was kind of campy. But it turns out that there was an earlier prototype, and you talk about this bat, the El Murcielago, known as the Bat, this Mexican wrestler. Here we go with the Mexican wrestlers again. Tell me about El Murcielago.
Yeah, it was very interesting because, as you said, predated Batman. So he was a luchador that had a bat appearance. He didn't really do real-life superhero type of activities, but I just, thought it was interesting that he was kind of Batman's Mexican precursor.
Yeah, he debuted back in April of 1938. A full year, you write here on your blog, a full year before Bob Kane and Bill Finger created Batman in Detective Comics number 27. And also before Norman Daniels, a.k.a. G. Wyman Jones, introduced his pulp fiction hero, the Black Bat, in July of 1939. Now, there was a conference like a Comic-Con or something, and you sort of assembled a panel of some of these superheroes, these real-life superheroes. Who was on that panel?
Oh, it was great. So after the book came out, I was like, well, a fun way to promote this was to hit up some of the Comic-Cons and see if they'd be interested in having me host a panel of real-life superheroes. So I did 3 or 4 of them. I did Wizard World Chicago. I did the Chicago Comic and Entertainment Expo, C2E2, and Minneapolis Wizard World, and a couple smaller conventions too. So I switched it up a little bit, but the Watchmen and Blackbird were on 2 of those panels. Electron, he was from La Crosse. When I did the Minneapolis one, I had Razorhawk.
Yeah, tell me about Razorhawk. Who's Razorhawk?
Razorhawk's such a cool guy. He's a former semi-pro wrestler, so he's a big guy. He used to wrestle under the name Jack T. Ripper. And just a really nice guy, and organizes this big event called Hope. And he started doing it at the San Diego Comic-Con, which of course is one of the biggest conventions in the world. So I was fortunate enough to be able to take a vacation to San Diego and, not only observe these guys, but I pitched in and helped. They had a huge truck full of backpacks that were filled with supplies. They had a truck that was filled with food and juice and stuff like that. There's about 30 real-life superheroes who kind of, they went to the Comic-Con, but they really just wanted to take this trip so they could meet each other and collaborate on a big project. So they drove these. I have to tell you, it's depressing. You see the fancy Comic-Con, and then a mile away, there's a total Skid Row.
Yes.
Filled with homeless people. So they all pitched in and handed out all these supplies and got to enjoy each other's company. So Razorhawk from Minneapolis organized that. And since then, it's kind of franchised, so there are Hope events in several different cities around the country every year, including I went again, this is maybe a couple of years ago, I went to the Hope Chicago, and there was a good, 20 real-life superheroes there doing the same thing.
Is that where Crusader Prime is, in Chicago?
Yes, right, Crusader Prime, good guy.
I was going to ask you how psychologists or sociologists view this subculture. Did you have a chance to talk to any of them?
Yes. Well, so one interesting thing is just kind of the empowerment that wearing a mask gives you. It gives you a different sort of feeling, you know. But the one psychologist I talked to said something very interesting. She was kind of exploring this theory that she has that people have something called extreme altruism. And she found that it's actually similar to, you know, kind of being a sociopath, but there's a fine line difference. So, you know, the person that's willing to run into a burning building to save someone is kind of in the same tree, I guess, as someone that's maybe a little bit psychotic, you know, or a sociopath.
Interesting.
So they're similar, but they're different.
Almost like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
But one obviously is being channeled for positive results. Incidentally, have any of them rushed into a burning building to save someone?
Not that I know of, but I mean, some of them have definitely run into some scary situations. You know, like the Phoenix Jones story I told, and other situations like that.
Do you have a handle on how big a subculture is this? I mean, is there now essentially at least one real-life superhero for every major city in America?
It's really, and this has always been a challenge for me, it's hard to keep track because you will see a lot of what I would call posers who maybe make a costume and take a picture of themselves in their backyard and then invent, or at least their stories seem like they could be invented. And they'll kind of do that for a couple of weeks, and then they'll just disappear, you know, and people are constantly kind of quietly and mysteriously disappearing. Some of them come back, some of them don't. So it's really hard to get a head count. But, you know, I do know I've seen a lot of pictures and a lot of videos of people actually out on patrols and stuff like that. So most major cities have at least one active real-life superhero. Some have a team. Definitely the biggest populations are in San Francisco Bay Area. There's also a lot in New York City. And Minneapolis actually has had a fair number, too.
Are there any that have sort of developed certain pieces of technology? I don't know. Let's say, for example, any of them, maybe they're into parkour and they're able to scale tall buildings, or maybe they've developed some sort of equipment. Anyone like that who's kind of combined their inventiveness with their superhero activities?
There are a couple that practice parkour. Definitely a lot of gadget building.
Can you give me an example? Because I love gadgets.
Yeah. So one, besides the real-life superheroes, they have these really cool, and again, they're kind of comic book counterparts. They call themselves builders that just like build stuff for them. So I remember one builder was working on something that I thought was kind of genius, which was a portable police light. So it would, if you saw, let's say you saw a group of people congregating and you thought they were going to do a crime, you could stand around the corner and activate this so it would appear that there's a police car coming around the corner. But it's actually just a handheld device that mimics it.
Right.
And then, you know, a lot of them do gadgets I think are kind of for show, grappling hook guns and stuff like that.
You gotta have a grappling hook. You gotta have a grappling hook gun.
Yeah. So I thought the builders were interesting. The other kind of subcomponent, oracles. Oracles are people that don't want to patrol, but they're kind of the online support for real-life superheroes.
Right.
So
like
they can look at crime maps online and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you got to have the computer nerd who's sort of communicating with them. Yes, the perpetrator is heading east on Main Street, that kind of guy. Yeah.
Right. So like in the Batman comics, there is actually a character called Oracle, who was she was formerly Batgirl, but she got crippled, and she's in a wheelchair. But Batman will be zooming around. She'll be like telling him information in his earpiece about the building layout and stuff like that.
Cool. Very cool. I was just wondering about my guys right now. I found they're always looking for new YouTube channels, and they found this one where I can't remember the name of it, but they build, for example, they try to reconstruct, Thor's hammer,
Right.
but it's electrified.
Oh yeah, I saw that video. That's
You've
cool.
seen that? Oh, my guys go crazy over that stuff. So I'm just wondering if any of these superheroes are trying to develop something like that. That would be dangerous, though.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite of all of the real-life superheroes that you've met? Do you have a favorite?
Well, I met Thanatos, like I described Thanatos in Vancouver. I felt really inspired by him. I was like, this is maybe seen as kind of a weird thing that you're doing, but I think he has a really good heart. I think that he's trying to help people out who are down and out. So he was definitely one of the favorite people that I met. But I met a lot of great real-life superheroes, and it's really fun because I'm still friends with a lot of them on Facebook. So, I'll post something about my life, and then Bob will have a comment, and Jane will have a comment, and then, Red Defender RLSH will say, good work, man. So it's kind of fun having a bunch of real-life superheroes as friends on social media. And I stay in touch with a fair amount of them. Geist was from Minneapolis.
That's a hotbed. That's a hotbed of superheroes.
Yeah. He was swinging through Milwaukee, and he just kind of dropped in on me. And it was
literally.
I mean, he stopped by, and it was unusual to see him not wearing a green cowboy outfit with, his sunglasses and his bandana covering his face.
Oh,
and it kind of took me a minute. I was like, oh yeah.
This is a fascinating subculture that you've tapped into. A terrific book. Congratulations. I know it's been out a while, but again, it's Heroes in the Night, Inside the Real Life Superhero. T, I really enjoyed meeting you and having this conversation, and we're going to have you back on to talk about Monster Hunters.
That sounds great.
All right. All the best. Thanks, T.
Thank you.